You know what finally broke me? I was standing in my kitchen holding a wooden spoon I'd bought at one of those nice houseware stores. Paid about $18 for it, and within 3 months the finish was peeling off into my soup. The handle had cracked right where it meets the bowl, and the whole thing felt like I was stirring with a 2x4. I remember thinking, people have been making wooden spoons for thousands of years. How is it possible that we've gotten worse at it? Then about 4 years ago I met a Swedish carver at a craft fair in Vermont. He had a table full of spoons and ladles and little butter knives, all carved by hand. No lathe, no power tools. Just a small axe, a straight knife, and a hook knife. I picked one up, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you it was one of the most beautiful, perfectly balanced kitchen tools I've ever held. And he told me any peasant in Scandinavia could have made the same spoon 300 years ago. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how they did it, step by step, and why the results are genuinely better than anything you'll find in a store. Plus, stick around to the end because I'll share a finishing secret that means you'll never have to worry about toxic coatings on your kitchen utensils again. Let's get into it. What we're talking about today is a tradition of hand carving that stretches back centuries across Northern Europe, from Sweden and Norway through Russia and into the British Isles. These weren't decorative arts. These were everyday kitchen tools made by everyday people, and the techniques behind them are as sound today as they were in the 1600s. Once you see how this works, you'll realize you don't need a shop full of equipment to make something genuinely excellent. So let me give you some background on where this comes from, because it matters. In Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden, there's a tradition called sloyd. The word roughly translates to skill or craft, and it was a system of handwork that was taught to children as part of their basic education starting in the 1800s. But the roots go back much further than that. For centuries before sloyd became a formal curriculum, peasant families across Sweden, Norway, Finland, and into Russia carved their own household utensils every winter. When the fields were frozen and the days were short, families would sit by the fire and carve spoons, ladles, bowls, butter spreaders, everything a kitchen needed. They used local woods, mostly birch, but also alder, cherry, and fruit woods like apple and a plum. And they used green wood, meaning freshly cut, still full of moisture. That's a critical detail I'll come back to. What strikes me most about this tradition is how practical it is. These weren't artisans in a guild workshop. These were farmers, fishermen, mothers, grandfathers. People with rough hands and limited tools who still managed to produce utensils that were comfortable, durable, and often strikingly beautiful. There's a philosophy underneath it all that I think explains why. The Scandinavian carving tradition treats wood as a living material with its own personality. You don't force it into a shape. You read what the wood wants to do and you work with that. When I first heard that from the Swedish carver I met, I thought it sounded a little too poetic. But once I started carving this way, I realized it's the most practical advice anyone ever gave me about working with wood. Now let me walk you through how they actually do it, starting with the very first step, which most people skip entirely. Before a traditional spoon carver ever picks up a knife, they spend real time studying the piece of wood they're about to work. And I don't mean glancing at it. I mean reading the grain the way you'd read a map. Here's what they're looking for. First, they want a piece with the grain running continuously from the tip of the bowl to the end of the handle. No run out. No cross grain, no knots in the working area. A spoon with cross grain in the neck, that thin transition between the bowl and the handle, is a spoon that's going to snap the first time someone uses it to scrape the bottom of a cast iron skillet. Second, they look for a natural curve. This is the part that really opened my eyes. A good spoon carver doesn't start with a straight billet and try to carve a curve into it. They look for a branch or a section of trunk where the grain already curves naturally. The crank of a spoon, that gentle bend where the bowl drops below the handle, is strongest when it follows the grain rather than cutting across it. Traditional carvers would walk through the woods, specifically looking for crooks, those spots where a branch meets the trunk at just the right angle. That crook becomes the natural curve of the spoon. The species matters too. Birch is the classic Scandinavian choice because it's tight-grained, hard enough to hold up in the kitchen, and it carves beautifully when green. But fruit woods like apple, plum, and cherry are exceptional. Sycamore, the European variety, was the traditional English choice for dairy utensils because it doesn't impart flavor. Here in the States, I've had wonderful results with black cherry, sugar maple, and applewood from a neighbor's pruned orchard. Whatever you choose, the key is to work it green. Freshly cut wood carves like firm cheese compared to seasoned wood, which carves like trying to whittle a rock. The difference is night and day. The second thing I learned that surprised me was the roughing out process. Most of us, if we were going to carve a spoon, would probably reach for a bandsaw to cut out a blank. Maybe a coping saw if we're going the hand tool route. But traditional carvers start with a small axe, and they do the majority of the shaping before a knife ever touches the wood. The tool they use is a carving hatchet, or a small forest axe, something with a head weight of about 1 to 1.5 pounds and a handle around 14 inches long. The Gransfors Brooks Wildlife Hatchet is a modern version that's very close to what traditional carvers used. You split your log section in half, then in quarters if it's large enough, and you begin hewing the rough spoon shape with controlled axe work on a chopping block. The key is you're removing wood in large, efficient chips, not trying to be precise. You're aiming to get within maybe a quarter inch of your final shape on the outside surfaces. What amazed me when I first tried this was how fast it is. With a sharp hatchet and green birch, I could rough out a spoon blank in about 5 minutes. The same work on a bandsaw might take 3 minutes, but then you've got sawdust everywhere, you need hearing protection, and you've lost that connection to the grain. With the axe, you can feel the grain. You can feel when you're working with it and when you're fighting it. Every chip tells you something about the wood. The traditional carvers could rough out a spoon blank in 2 or 3 minutes because they'd been doing it since childhood. I'm slower, but I'm getting better, and the process itself is honestly one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in woodworking. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these old world methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called The Lost Workshop, and it is a complete guide to hand tool woodworking the way medieval craftsmen actually did it. 156 pages, 17 chapters, 33 illustrations, techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. Once you've roughed out the blank with your hatchet, it's time to hollow the bowl, and this is where the hook knife comes in. If you've never used one, a hook knife is exactly what it sounds like. It's a short handle with a curved blade that sweeps around in a tight arc, almost like a tiny gouge mounted on a stick. The traditional Scandinavian hook knife has a blade curve radius of about 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch, which gives you a bowl depth of roughly 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch on a typical eating spoon. The one I use most is a Mora 163, which is a double-edged hook knife. That means the blade cuts on both the push stroke and the pull stroke, so you can work from either side of the bowl without repositioning. Some carvers prefer a single-edged hook, like the Mora 162, because it gives you a little more control. Either way, the technique is the same. You start at the center of the bowl area and make sweeping, arcing cuts toward the rim. You're not digging. You're slicing. The edge should be moving across the grain, peeling up a thin, curling shaving. Here's what took me the longest to learn. The depth of your bowl isn't just about scooping out wood. It's about wall thickness. Traditional carvers aim for a consistent wall thickness of about 3/16 of an inch across the entire bowl. Not paper thin, not clunky. Just that sweet spot where the spoon is light enough to feel elegant but strong enough to last for years. You check this by holding the bowl up to a light source. When the light glows through evenly across the whole bowl, you're in the right range. If you see dark spots, the wall is still too thick there. If you see bright spots, you've gone too thin. That light test is something every peasant carver knew, and it works perfectly. The sound changes too. When you're cutting and the wall is still thick, you hear a dull, muffled sound. As you get thinner, the wood starts to ring slightly under the knife. That auditory feedback is something you can't get from any machine, and once you learn to hear it, you'll never overcarve a bowl again. Now, once the bowl is hollowed, you move to the outside. Surfaces, the handle, the neck, and the back of the bowl. This is where the sloyd knife takes over. A sloyd knife is a fixed blade knife with a blade length of about 3 to 4 inches and a comfortable rounded handle that fills your palm. The classic is the Mora 106, which has been in production for over 100 years and costs less than $20. That one knife in the hands of a traditional carver does about 70% of the total work on a spoon. The grip that traditional carvers use most is the chest lever grip. You lock both hands on the knife handle, brace the spine of the blade against the workpiece, and push the blade forward using your chest and shoulders, not your wrists. This gives you tremendous control and power without fatiguing your hands. For detail work around the neck and the transition into the bowl, they switch to a thumb push grip, where your offhand thumb pushes the back of the blade through short, precise cuts. What I noticed? Watching experienced carvers is that they barely look at the spoon from the front. They're constantly rotating it, checking the profile from the side, from the end, running their thumb along the curves. The handle should have a gentle oval cross-section, not round, not square. Something about 5/8 of an inch by 7/8 of an inch feels natural in the hand. The neck, that critical transition, should flow in a smooth, unbroken curve from handle to bowl with no abrupt steps or flat spots. This brings me to something that genuinely changed how I think about symmetry. Traditional carvers don't use templates. They don't use calipers. They don't draw precise outlines on their blanks. They achieve symmetry by feel, and their spoons are often more visually harmonious than anything cut on a duplicating lathe. The secret is they work bilaterally. They make a cut on one side, then immediately make the matching cut on the other side, while the memory of that first cut is still fresh. In their hands, they're constantly comparing one side to the other by touch, running a thumb down one side, then the other, feeling for any difference in the curve. Your fingers can detect variations of less than a 32nd of an inch, which is more precise than most people can see at arm's length. I'll be honest, when I started carving spoons this way, my first few were noticeably lopsided, but by my fifth or sixth spoon, something clicked. My hands started to learn the shapes, and I found myself making corrections almost unconsciously. There's a Swedish saying that roughly translates to "the first 100 are just practice." And while that sounds discouraging, the truth is you start seeing real improvement by spoon number 3 or 4. The last technique I want to cover before we get to common mistakes is probably the most counterintuitive one for modern woodworkers. Traditional peasant carvers never sanded their spoons, ever. The finished surface came straight off your knife. This isn't laziness. A properly executed knife cut on green wood produces a surface that is genuinely smoother and more durable than a sanded surface. Here's why. When you cut wood with a sharp blade, you sever the fibers cleanly. The cell walls remain intact, and the surface is almost burnished by the passage of the edge. When you sand wood, you're tearing and abrading those fibers. Under magnification, a sanded surface looks like a field of broken stumps, while a knife-finished surface looks like a freshly mowed lawn. That torn, sanded surface absorbs water more readily, stains more easily, and develops a fuzzy texture after repeated washing. A knife-finished spoon actually becomes smoother with use. The catch is your knife must be truly sharp. I'm talking about honed to at least 8,000 grit on a waterstone, with a polished bevel that reflects light. Traditional carvers strop their blades on a leather strop, loaded with fine compound every few minutes while working. If your cuts are tearing instead of slicing, if you see any fuzziness in the cut surface, your edge isn't ready. Sharpening isn't a step in the process. It is the process. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years. Things I used to do myself that this tradition handles completely differently. The first pattern is reaching for power tools by default. Most of us assume that a bandsaw or a lathe will produce a better result faster. But for spoon carving specifically, hand tools are genuinely faster once you develop basic skill. And the result is better because you're responding to the grain in real time instead of forcing a predetermined shape through the wood. The second pattern is working with dry wood. I did this for my first 2 spoons because I had some nice dry cherry blanks sitting around. It was miserable. The wood fought me the entire time. My edges dulled twice as fast, and the surface quality was poor. Green wood is not just easier to carve, it's the correct material for this process. The moisture in the fibers allows them to be cut cleanly rather than crushed or torn. The third pattern is over-designing before you start. I used to draw detailed templates and trace them onto blanks, but the template can't account for the grain direction, the natural curve, or the personality of that specific piece of wood. Traditional carvers let the wood influence the design. The spoon that emerges is a collaboration between the carver's intention and the wood's nature. And that's why hand-carved spoons have a warmth and character that machine-made ones never achieve. The fourth pattern is sanding and then coating with polyurethane or lacquer. This is the worst thing you can do to a kitchen spoon. Those coatings eventually crack, peel, and flake into your food. And they prevent the wood from developing the natural patina that actually protects it. Once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one spoon at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning, this is about finishing. And it's so simple it almost feels like cheating. Traditional Scandinavian spoon carvers finish their spoons with nothing but food-safe oil and daily use. Here's the method. Once your spoon is carved and you're happy with it, let it dry slowly indoors for about 3 to 5 days. It will likely warp slightly, which is normal. Green wood spoons always move a little as they dry. Then soak it in walnut oil, not the refined stuff from the grocery store, but cold-pressed raw walnut oil. Let it soak for about 24 hours, wipe off the excess, and let it cure for another 2 days. That first oil treatment seals the wood and gives it a beautiful warm tone. After that, just use the spoon. Use it every day. The oils from your cooking, the repeated contact with food, the washing and drying, all of it builds a natural patina that protects the wood better than any synthetic finish. My oldest hand-carved spoon is almost 4 years old now. I use it nearly every day, wash it by hand, and it looks better now than the day I finished it. The surface has this deep, rich color and a satin smoothness that no amount of polyurethane could replicate. That's the real secret. The best finish for a wooden spoon is a life spent in the kitchen. Before you head out, I want to make sure you know about my book, The Lost Workshop. It goes way deeper than any single video can. With 17 chapters on hand tool woodworking, the way medieval craftsmen actually did it, 33 detailed illustrations, and 156 pages of real hands-on knowledge. If you want to bring these medieval methods into your own shop, this is the guide to do it. Just scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for spending time with me today, and if you have not already, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. I'll see you in the next video. Go carve a spoon. You won't regret it.